Russia, 1917, a nation on the verge of collapse as the First World War enters its third year. The Russian people are cold, hungry, underpaid and overworked. In February, the people of Petrograd refuse to go to work. The Tsar abdicates and a temporary government is set up. However, this government doesn't manage to improve the people's situation, and the war continues as yet more Russians go hungry and die in foreign lands. For some, it seems as though this provisional government was no different from the Tsar's. In October, Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky lead a group of communists to overthrow the government and set up the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. Quick side note, communism. In 1917, Russia was a capitalist society. In a capitalist society, a small group of wealthy landowners, known as the bourgeoisie, control all the farms, factories and mines, and collect all the money they make. They hand some of the money to their workers, known as the proletariat, but keep most of it to themselves, allowing them to live in luxury while the proletariat stays poor. German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels believed that the proletariat would rise up against the bourgeoisie and seize the means of production. Then the property would be owned by the community, and each person would get what they needed, and there would be no poverty. This was the society Lenin and Trotsky were striving to achieve, one built on community and love, rather than selfishness and greed. The first thing Lenin does now that he's boss is end the war with Germany. Secondly, he requisitions thousands of tons of grain from Russian farmers to feed the people of Petrograd and other cities. A group of Russian royalists rise up against Lenin and try to put Nicholas back on the throne, starting the Russian Civil War. It lasts until 1922 and cost the lives of 12 million Russian men, women and children. After the war, Ukraine, Belarus and the Transcaucasus joined Russia and formally formed the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics. Well, what does that mean, Union of Socialist Soviet Republics? Well, a socialist is someone who believes that the distribution of wealth should be regulated by the state, and a Soviet was an administrative council run by the proletariat. So the USSR was a state run by the proletariat. In 1924, Lenin dies, but not before appointing Joseph Stalin as his successor. However, other members of the Communist Party believe Stalin shouldn't be leader, and there is a power struggle for a few years. Stalin beats the pretenders and becomes the new leader of the USSR. In order to grow the Soviet economy, Stalin collectivizes agriculture. Millions of peasants die of starvation, adjusting to this new way of life. Since the power struggle following Lenin's death, Stalin has been suspicious of his comrades in the Communist Party. He believes Trotsky, among others, is plotting against him and orders the arrests, executions and exiles of almost 1 million alleged dissidents of the Communist Party. Meanwhile, Germany has a new leader. He doesn't like Stalin and Stalin doesn't like him. So naturally they become friends. Germany and the USSR invade Poland, triggering the Second World War. A few years later, Germany forgets about their friendship and invades the USSR. After millions of Soviet deaths, the USSR beats back the Germans at Stalingrad and chases them all the way to Berlin. On their way west, the Soviets also set up communist governments in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia and East Germany. And on the river Elbe, Soviet and American soldiers meet. Here they're best friends. In a few years, they'll be worst enemies. The United States drop an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The USSR quickly begin work on their own atomic bomb. After the war, Germany is split into East and West, with the Soviets controlling the East and the Allies controlling the West. Despite being entirely in East Germany, Berlin is also split between the Soviets and Allies. In an effort to kick the Allies out of Berlin, Stalin orders the Berlin blockade, in which he stopped all Allied vehicles entering East Germany by land. So the Allies enter East Germany by plane, bringing tons of food for the Berliners with them. Stalin's blockade fails, and friendly relations between the USSR and the United States come to an end as the Cold War begins. The USSR detonates its own atomic bomb as a nuclear arms race begins between the USSR and the United States. Communist regimes, backed by the USSR, take hold in China, Vietnam and North Korea, and the outbreak of the Korean War causes relations between the USSR and the United States to break down even further. Stalin, who's now been in power for almost 30 years, dies. Nikita Khrushchev takes over. He denounces Stalin's brutal regime and believes that the USSR and the United States should live in peaceful coexistence. The USSR launched the satellite Sputnik into space, signalling the start of the space race. They follow it up by launching Laika the dog into space, who doesn't come back, and Yuri Gagarin the human, who does. In East Berlin, many Germans are fleeing into West Germany, where life looks much nicer. The Soviets build a big wall to stop this. Now the East Berliners are trapped. Over in Cuba, communist Fidel Castro ousts American puppet leader Fulgencio Batista. Castro asks the Soviets if they would like to store some nuclear missiles in Cuba. The Soviets would, and this upsets the Americans greatly, as Cuba is right next to them. The world holds its breath as the two nuclear superpowers almost go to war. Fortunately, they come to an agreement, and the nuclear weapons are removed from Cuba. The Communist Party don't much like Khrushchev after this and fire him. Leonid Brezhnev takes over. In Czechoslovakia, Alexander Dubček is elected and begins a period of liberalization, moving away from core Soviet values. Brezhnev quickly puts an end to this by sending soldiers and tanks to the Czechoslovakian capital of Prague. Dubček is removed from office. To try and prevent the destruction of the world through nuclear Armageddon, the USSR and United States signed the Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty, promising that they wouldn't build any more intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or anti-ballistic missile defense systems. This begins a period of détente, a French word meaning relaxation. There were scientific summits, cultural exchanges, even James Bond stopped killing Russians for a while. But it was short-lived. The communist regime has taken control of Afghanistan, but the Afghan people are resisting the communists, and so Brezhnev orders a Soviet invasion of the country. Brezhnev dies and is replaced by KGB chief Yuri Andropov. He doesn't do anything and dies. He is replaced by Konstantin Chernenko. He doesn't do anything and also dies, and is replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev. By the time Gorbachev steps in, the USSR isn't doing very well. The Communist Party is horribly corrupt, and the economy is down the toilet. Gorbachev tries to tackle both these issues with his policies of glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost, meaning openness, involves the government becoming more transparent and relaxing censorship in the media. The Soviet people finally found out about the outside world and about the past and the government's atrocities, and they were not very happy. Perestroika was the restructuring of the economy. Stalin's planned economy was no longer working, so Gorbachev opened up the markets, allowing Soviet people to own their own businesses and welcomed foreign investors and goods. In 1988, the first McDonald's opens in Moscow. The people now understand just how low their quality of lives are compared with their enemies. This is nothing like the workers' paradise Lenin promised 70 years ago. In Poland, the people topple the communist government and replace it with a democratically elected, capitalist one. Hungary follows, then Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia and Romania. In East Germany, the Berlin Wall is torn down, reuniting families and communities after 20 years of separation. After 10 years, the Soviets leave Afghanistan, battered and bruised. Lithuania declares independence from the USSR, followed by the other republics. In September, the Communist Party vote to dissolve the USSR. On Christmas Day, 1991, Gorbachev resigns, and Boris Yeltsin becomes the first president of the Russian Federation.